It's not showing anything yet. 1 second. I've got Shelley in the waiting room. Oh, it's locked, Nadia. Have you had your sandwich if you don't do that? I can't see you in the waiting room, Hayley. Nope. Nope. I'm just trying to get the link. If you've registered it once, then you should have that ID, shouldn't you? I've got Nadia in the waiting room. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Sorry, a bit later than usual. Just because we were running a little bit, you know, split second timing, and that's when, of course, the technology doesn't work. So, good. So what we're going to talk about today is disciplinaries. Obviously, we're going to talk about any other issues you have. That's absolutely fine, but not at. But we're going to go through the PowerPoint, which I have saved in the correct Dropbox. Let me just put the link to the Dropbox in. Okay. I'll put the Dropbox link into the chat. Ooh, I've lost the chat now. Where's it gone? There you go. So that's a Dropbox link. Sorry, so I'm going to put the Zoom recording in there, and there is already the PowerPoint on disciplinaries in there. So the Zoom recording will take a few minutes to process before I can save it, but the PowerPoint is in there already. What I'm going to do is obviously share the screen. 1 second. And do that, and then we can get started. It's always when Zoom is like, oh, I don't know whether I want to do this. Zoom. And it's such a great day today. It's just so miserable outside. I just want to curl up under a duvet, really. Right. So disciplinaries. Can everybody see that on the screen? Nod, shake. Can you see anything? Picture on the screen? If you can't, then let me know. So what we have here is, why do we need to do a disciplinary? So we often get called by clients or other golf clubs saying, right, so I've given them a written warning, and then it's going through, what did you do to give them a written warning? You cannot give somebody a written warning or a final written warning or generally a dismissal unless you have gone through a full disciplinary process. Okay. So if you say I've given them a written warning, or even worse, a verbal warning, then there's a problem and you won't be able to rely on it. The most you can rely on is it's the equivalent of being in a performance management meeting and saying, this needs to improve, don't do what you did again. But it is not a warning, it's not part of the formal process, okay? When you're doing a disciplinary process, who needs to be involved? Who should be running the meetings, okay? It really does depend on the situation. It depends what has happened and what needs to be investigated. Normally, it's going to be the line manager at the investigation stage and the club manager later on, and then maybe committee at the appeal stage. But you cannot involve anybody in these meetings to run these meetings who has been involved in the situation. So if you've had the house manager punching the club manager on the nose, the house manager is obviously being disciplined. The club manager can't be involved. And if there are witnesses to that situation, they would also not be able to be involved. So if the chairman had witnessed it, then he would be a witness to it, but he would not be able to chair the meeting because he wouldn't be seen as independent. And it is independent within an internal process. It's not independent like going to criminal court, because we have had that a couple of times that people say, oh, we need somebody totally outside the organisation, not even our HR people, so we have an independent process. No, that is not what the process is. The process is just not that the person who you punched on the nose is now deciding whether you should have a disciplinary, because that's obviously the committee should be involved. This is one of the downsides of being on the committee. The upside is you get your parking space. The downside is you have to do some of these meetings. But it depends on who you have on the committee and what their strengths are, whether we ask them. We do not just default to the captain or chairman. It really does depend who has the skills to do it, because you do not want, as we've had just now, unfortunately, people go, oh, yes, that's fine, without asking any questions. You've got to ask questions, you've got to follow up. And some people just can't do that. So that's fine.
It's
HR,
also, sorry, Caroline, it's really important also that if you are going to get committee members to do this, that you are actually clear with them about what part of the process they're going to be doing. So if you have a disciplinary, there's no point in saying, just go and have a chat with this person about these things. They need to understand that which part of the process they're handling, and that it's part of a process and what is expected of them as the people chairing and leading that part of the process, because otherwise they really don't understand what they're in for, and they don't have the opportunity to say, I can't do that, I have no clue what I'm doing.
Exactly. And what you have to remember as well, that there are some people in golf clubs who only react well or only appreciate hierarchy. So you might need to build that in, that they don't respect the person who's actually doing the line management, the investigation or disciplinary meeting, if they do not see them as being more senior in ranking than them. Okay, so there's lots of things to consider when you're trying to choose who's going to do this, and this is why you talk it through with us and we discuss the different options. And depending on what it is, if it's somebody who's just been persistently late for poor timekeeping, that can still be a disciplinary. That's a whole different level to somebody who is being accused of sexual harassment, bullying, or theft from the till, where we have no particular evidence. Those are going to be different worlds apart, and they need different people doing them. Okay. You should always have somebody from HR in there, because I'm going to say we don't have the relationships with the people, which makes it a lot easier for us to follow up on statements that are inconsistent or wishy-washy, or, oh, well, you know how it is. Oh, no, rather than like committees do, is like, oh, yeah, I know how it is. No. Tell us how it is. Go into a bit more detail, please. Explain it to us. People don't like that, obviously. So that gets the results we need, and we can do that on Zoom. So there is no need for anybody to go through this alone, that we can dial in on Zoom. We strongly prefer that everybody is then on Zoom, not just us, because that is very difficult to interrupt into a chat, because the person being disciplined will always try and get a physical person on their side. Okay. And we always do an audio recording. But if it's on Zoom, it's easy to do the recording. If it's not on Zoom, you need to have an audio recording on your phone, not notes. We just had one where luckily we had the recording, so we could actually see what was said. But the note said, this person commented on the other person's mental health. Commented how? That they've gone doolally, or that they're really concerned that they need help. There's a difference between the two statements. Commented is too general. We need to know exactly what was said, so that if there is a tribunal claim, we know what the damage limitation needs to be. Okay, we need to be able to find that out. As it turned out, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but this is why we say always audio record. You then have the tone of voice that's involved. You know whether somebody's been shouting, whether somebody got aggressive, the exact words that were used. And as we all know, words are important. And then we can get it transcribed, which makes it a lot easier There's no notes. You shouldn't have a note taker in there. We've also had a note taker in there, and the person again being disciplined, saying to the note taker, "Oh, you know what it's like, don't you, Libby?" And Libby saying, "Yes, I do." "Oh my gosh, you're not there. You are not supposed to be commenting on this case. Stop talking." So don't have the note taker there. Okay, just the audio. We are in the 21st century. We can get it transcribed. Okay, sorry. So I've got right. So the exceptions for the disciplinary process are you do not have to use it for any staff under 2 years service, but you do have to have the clause in your handbook, in your disciplinary policy saying that. If you're one of our clients, we have that statement in there. So we can then choose whether we want to use a disciplinary process or not. We would normally say under a year, probably not. We would just part company. Sometimes we do it if there's protected characteristics involved, so that it's documented that it's not to do with them. If, however, they've been really good staff for a year and then there's a blip, then we would say give them the chance of a disciplinary to exonerate themselves. Okay. The other clause that you have as a client from us is about sickness. So we have in the disciplinary and the sickness policy that if they go off sick after being notified of any stage of a disciplinary process, informal or formal, they will only be entitled to SSP, not full sick pay. So that is in there. So if they think they're going to be clever, it's absolutely, you've gone off sick, that's great. We'll wait until you come back. And by the way, you're getting £96 a week for being off, not your full, 3 months enhanced sick pay. That usually brings them back fairly quickly. Okay, so the disciplinary process has the investigation, the disciplinary, and the appeal. Okay. The investigation is what is called the informal stage of the process. So it is an essential stage. It is seen as informal under the ACAS guidelines, okay? Which means as an informal stage, you do not need to give them an invitation to a meeting. You can, we strongly recommend you don't. And now people are back at work, there is no need to do that. If you want them on a Zoom meeting, obviously you're gonna have to let them know in advance. But if you're doing face-to-face, you just say, "Oh, could I have a word?" and you bring them in. And then you say, "This is an investigation meeting." You do not need to give them a heads up on that. They do not get any information in advance. That's the next stage. This stage, we are just seeing what their initial reaction is without any preparation to what's happened. Tell me what happened with the money in the till. Full stop. Open questions. They are not entitled to a companion, okay? At the later stages, they are entitled to a companion. They are not entitled to a companion, anybody at this stage. There are no notes to be provided to them after the meeting, okay? But we do audio record it, and we would say we're recording it because so that we can concentrate on the conversation. Sometimes we offer them the audio recording. Sometimes we wait until they ask. It's not usually a problem with the audio recording, but they don't have any right to notes, so they're not going to get a transcription after that. Even if we decide we need a transcription to make it easier to have the statements, they don't automatically get a transcription. Okay? In meetings. So in the meeting, in all the meetings, you need ideally one person on behalf of the club, one HR person, and the audio recording. If you're not having HR, then you should probably have 2 people. Again, no more than 2. It's not supposed to be a panel interview, and that is just going to make it really difficult, as we all know, dealing with committees and boards, to get an actual decision. So it's 1 or 2 from the club, ideally 1 from the club, 1 HR, and the audio recording. And then the audio recording can be sent through to us to review, to say, yes, that went well, these are the next steps, or okay, that was an unmitigated disaster, we need to regroup. Okay. So phase, we won't have another phase like that. So in the investigation, you're going to go through the evidence you have for while you're going through this process. You need to send us the evidence beforehand to review it. You need an objective third party to go, yes, that is evidence that some wrongdoing has happened, and we're going to talk to them about it and see what their version of events is. If it's just, oh, well, yeah, he's not really that motivated and he doesn't really smile when I speak to him, and yeah, I think he's on his phone quite a lot, and so can we have a disciplinary? That's not evidence at all. So you've got to talk it through, otherwise you're going to have a very uncomfortable meeting, because the person you're talking to, when you say, oh, you're on your phone too much, they'll say, how much am I on my phone? Well, just too much. It's having the worst type of conversation with your teenagers. Just not good. Okay. After you've done the investigation, if we've not been in it, get us to review your audio and your evidence, because the person being investigated may well have said something in there that we're going to use in the disciplinary. We had this the other day about somebody who just wasn't logging time at an IT company, so nobody knew what was going, no work was in, and the investigation meeting was just well, a godsend really, because he was just like, yeah, it's a bit boring and can't see the point, I don't want to do it, and I know what to do, I know how to do it, I just don't want to do it, and I can't be bothered. And all of that was then used in the disciplinary. Now, he was only at first written warning stage, but it was his own statements from the transcription that were then used against him. And he knew he was in an investigation meeting, he knew it was a formal meeting being recorded, and yet he chose to answer that way. And we will use what you say. There's no what they call in America Miranda rights. There's no, you have the right to remain silent. No, you don't have the right to remain silent. Okay. And then at the investigation, once you've done that, we've looked at the evidence, looked at the audio, we then make a decision on whether we're going forward with the disciplinary, or whether we're going to do an advisory note saying this was bad, don't do this in the future, do this in the future, but that's it. There's no warning, there's nothing. It's on the personnel file, but it's just showing that we've done something, but it's not actually a warning. Once that decision has been made about whether there's going to be a disciplinary, that is the end of the work for the investigation team. They are not to be involved anymore in the disciplinary process. And by that point, the committee, as like the ones we're dealing with at the moment, isn't that right, Nadia, are so grateful. They just never want to be involved again.
They have had enough. And it is actually because they weren't briefed. They didn't understand what they were doing. They thought they were just going to have a chat about a few issues. They didn't understand. And it actually turned into a bit of a monster, and they're so tired and so ready to be rid of it.
Yes, it's not funny, but it is interesting that obviously some people are very apologetic in a disciplinary and an investigation, and obviously you're more willing to forgive and come to some nice arrangement. Other people just go on the attack, and you're like, oh, you're really not helping your case here, to be honest. Okay, so that was the investigation. Then the next stage is disciplinary, which is a formal stage of the process, which means you do have to invite them in writing. You need to give them 3 days written notice of this. This is come through case law. It's never been challenged as being a reasonable amount of time in tribunal. So 3 working days notice is seen as a reasonable amount of time for them to prepare. You have to give them all evidence in advance, be that written witness statements, any printouts of stuff that you've seen they've done wrong, any CCTV videos, anything that you have, they have to have that in advance, or at least the opportunity to see it in advance. Like CCTV is sometimes difficult to download. Okay, then they get to see it under supervision in the office and watch what it is that we think we've got on them. Okay, and we have to say what they're accused of in the letter. So that's why we put so much effort into the investigation, because it needs to be really clear in the disciplinary letter, otherwise you're not going to be able to discipline them. Okay, they do have the right to a companion, which can be a work colleague or a trade union rep. If the person they are suggesting is one of those two, you cannot object. There is no more objecting. It used to be, if you do a Google search, it will say, oh yes, you can object if da da da. No, that was back in 2016. Okay, now case law is such that if they are a work colleague or a trade union rep, even if it's their mum who's a work colleague, that is absolutely fine. There is nothing you can say to object to that legally. They do not have the right, however, to bring a family member who is not a work colleague or a trade union rep, certainly not a solicitor, or an HR, not another HR person in it. So it's those are things they have to be able to bring somebody, and we can be a little bit flexible if they are. We have had some apprentices with learning difficulties that they do bring a family member, and that hasn't worked out badly. But for standard employees, we don't recommend that. Okay, they do have a right to notes afterwards. The easiest thing to do is to do a transcription, because then there is no disputing what was said, because it is word for word, and you're recording the disciplinary anyway, because we need it word for word to be able to evaluate what needs to happen next. Okay, so we're doing the audio recording, and we would advise them in the letter we send them, inviting them to the meeting, that we are recording. To be honest, I've only ever had one person object to it, and it was actually the trade union rep who was with the person being disciplined, who said, "You didn't tell me about this, so you can't do it," which was a bit annoying at the time. So that was about 3 years ago. Since then, we make sure any companion knows they're going to be recorded. We don't care what they say. They're not really supposed to be saying very much. They're just there to make sure that we're not browbeating the person who's being disciplined. But we always do the recording. And in the meeting, again, one person from the club, HR, and an audio recording. If you can't have HR, then definitely 2 people from the club, different to the investigation stage, plus the audio recording. Okay. And you need to make sure you're not discussing everything at committee, because if you discuss the investigation committee, that means that the whole of the committee have been involved, and they cannot be involved at the disciplinary or appeal stage. Okay. So disciplinary is still a formal stage process. So in the meeting, some people have said, "Oh, what if I want to call witnesses?" It's not a court case. It's not a court case. We would get witness statements from people who've been involved in the situation. If they want to go and get witness statements from people, that's absolutely fine. We would still be following up with them. But usually we get all the witness statements of people who were involved after the investigation. That's the point of the investigation. If they say, "Oh, well, Bob was there and he knows I didn't do that," great. We will go to Bob and get Bob's witness statement. So there's no cross-examining. It's not litigation. It is a sit down on the balance of probability. Did this happen, and what we're going to do next? I've said that, no objection to the companion, the different team to the investigation team, subgroup of the committee. So what you need to do is make sure that at the beginning of this process, if the committee are going to be involved, you say, right, who is doing the investigation, who's doing disciplinary, who's doing the appeal? Right, those teams do not talk together until the right part in the process. Okay, they do not discuss it at a full committee meeting. Things will leak. There will be somebody on the committee who feels, no matter how awful the act is that the person has done, that they're being disciplined for, feels sorry for them, and will leak information to them, which can then be used against the club to claim it's an unfair dismissal process. So we don't discuss it at committee. Okay. Oh, sorry. And I will go back. The other thing is also, if the members are pushing for information, they always just need to be informed, we are dealing with this in accordance with the ACAS guidelines on disciplinaries. Full stop. Get lost. If you're not interested, either you're really interested in helping, in which case volunteer for the committee, or you're not. You have no right to know what is going on with these people. Okay. Gross misconduct is one that comes up quite a lot, in as much that, oh, I think it's gross misconduct. Fine. There are changes to how it used to be. There is no more suspension. Okay. It used to be that you could not dismiss for gross misconduct unless you suspended them immediately. Now it's exactly the opposite. If you suspend, that will be seen as constructive dismissal unless there is a danger to life or property. So having a fight with the club manager and punching him on the nose would be, it's not good. I'm not saying people should do that, but it's not seen as danger to life. It would be only if they were going around punching anybody they came across that you would need to suspend them. Okay. And again, property, if they're stealing from the till, that does not count as danger to property. What you would be expected to do is to put them onto different duties. We have had a couple of club managers who we've unfortunately had to suspend because they were starting to interfere with evidence of the disciplinary of inappropriate transactions. So we did speak to one of them And he said, oh, but I'm just trying to make it, I'm just changing it to what it should be, what I intended it to be, but actually wasn't. It's like, no, you're now suspended with no remote access because actually you did do wrong things. You maybe did it for the right reasons, but you still did illegal things. Okay. So they are still on the property. They are still working. You give them different duties. If they've been stealing from the till, then you give them washing up responsibilities. You give them something where they don't touch money. Okay. This has the advantage that the committee, if they need to give you any approval to move forward, will do that quickly. Because if somebody is suspended, they'll say, oh, let's wait until Bob's back in 3 weeks from his holiday. No, gross misconduct needs to be dealt with quickly, and you can dismiss somebody within 3-4 days, 3-4 working days. You still have to go through the full process, okay? But you have the investigation, then you give them the invite to the gross misconduct disciplinary, saying they're at risk of dismissal. 3 days later, you have the disciplinary, you go through. If they have no extenuating circumstances, then it would be a dismissal on that date. So it's really only 3 or 4 working days that you would have to wait to get dismissal. People, when they get suspended, it can take weeks to get people to actually deal with it. So this is why it's not actually a bad thing to have them still in the building. And then if it is gross misconduct, depending on what it is, you have the option at the end of the investigation meeting or the disciplinary meeting to do a without prejudice conversation with them. So we had a head greenkeeper who, it turns out, had been running his car garage, what's it called, supported by the club, because he had just put all his invoices through as legitimate expenses for the greenkeeping department. And it was only when the new club manager came in and said, right, we seem to be spending quite a lot in the greenkeeping department, let's have a look at it, that he realized that they've been putting through for petrol and oil that didn't get used. Actually, there wasn't the type of oil that was being used in the machines, and all these other things, lots and lots of things. So we had the investigation meeting then. I mean, this was go back 5 years he had been doing this, and nobody in accounts noticed. They just paid the invoices, which is why you need to have accounts people who probably say, actually, there's a problem here. Anyway, I had the investigation meeting, showed you all the evidence, said, look, if we go through this, you may be dismissed for gross misconduct, and we'd have to tell everybody that asked for reference why you've been dismissed, or you can resign with immediate effect, and then we'll pay you your notice as an expiration. We can do that. And he did that, and then that was the end of it. So he did that in the meeting. He said, oh, I'll think about it. No, you do it now, or we carry on with the disciplinary. I don't mind either way. So he actually did it then. We accepted it then in writing, and we all moved on. He did try and come back a few weeks later and say, but this is unfair. It's like, we've got your resignation. If you would like to come back and we can do a gross misconduct disciplinary, we could do that. He went away again. So with the disciplinary, the outcome is either first written warning, final written warning, or dismissal. There is no more verbal warning. That was scrapped in 2009, so we don't use the words verbal warning. You can say, I warned them, i.e. you spoke to them and you warned them, but it's not a warning under employment law, okay? You have to give them the outcome within 5 working days, unless you have a longer period in your handbooks. I would say if you're working with us, the maximum you will have is 10 working days. There is no advantage to making it longer, because that just means that people put it off. It doesn't mean that you need more time. It's amazing how quickly people make up their minds anyway. But 5 working days, you need to give them the outcome in writing, and they have to have the right of appeal. Okay, and that is then the end of the work for the disciplinary team. And then we wait to see what happens next. So the outcome of that, the first written
Carolyne, can I interrupt you?
Yeah,
it is
sure.
just really important as well. We do not give an outcome in the meeting. Never give a disciplinary outcome in the meeting. Even if you go and think about it for 5 hours and then call them back at the end of the day and then give an outcome, is fine. But you never, ever give an outcome in the meeting, because you need to be seen to consider the evidence, and you cannot consider the evidence there and then.
Absolutely right, Nadia. And we also don't ever speak to them face to face to give them the outcome. It's always in writing. There is no benefit to doing it face to face. People will be upset. It may deteriorate. You might say things that can be used against the club. They might say things which can make their situation even worse. It's much better just to send them the email or send them the letter. And we do usually send it by email. We can do snail mail if we need to, but this is why at the beginning of these processes, we always make sure we have the staff member's private email address, because that's the quickest way to liaise with them. Okay, so you've given that out. It stays on their record for either 6 months as a first written or 12 months as a final written. We have had new clients come to us and said, right, so I've got a warning for them back in 2014. So can we use that now? No. Come on, guys, that's just a bit unfair. So, and when we're doing disciplinaries, anything that's really older than 3 months, unless there is a justification, like the head greenkeeper who've been, financing his car garage for 5 years, if it's older than 3 months, it's pretty much gone. It depends what it is, but generally older than 3 months, that boat has sailed. We need to do a new one. Would you agree, Nadia?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I'm talking away and I'm on mute. Yes, absolutely. And actually, in most cases, we say that you should react to finding something or an incident happening within a week. You really shouldn't let it lay around, because people forget things, and then it becomes really difficult to investigate it and to find the truth. People have time to cover things up, and act quickly.
Okay, so there is a new thing. So the suspension thing was a change. There is also a change to the benefit of employers, that if you have somebody on a final written warning for, I don't know, being rude or failing to fill up the mower and with new oil and now the mower's broken, whatever they have a final written warning for, if they do something else and it does not have to be related to the final written warning, something totally different like poor timekeeping, and they go through the disciplinary process and they would normally get a first written warning for that, the situation now is that is a default dismissal. If they've got a final written and they get a first written for something else, it goes on top of it, and that is then a dismissal. So don't think that you're gonna have to, which is what we used to have to do. We used to have to start back again at the beginning, go through, and then some employees, not many actually, would go, oh, I'm going to try and do something else to wind up the club, but something that's unrelated to the previous warnings. Now those warnings are seen as cumulative and will lead the default position, not that you could justify it. Your default position is that they should be dismissed, not that they should be kept on. And it's the keeping on that you will have to justify to a tribunal rather than the dismissal. So there is a benefit to this for employers, not many, but there is one. So we've got the appeal. They have the right to appeal within 5 working days of receiving the outcome. Okay, so if you take 5 working days to give it to them, they have then another 5 working days to come back. Okay, it's not 5 working days from the meeting. They need to do it in writing. They should really give us the reasons. To be honest, and I know some committees are like, well, they have to give us all the reasons, otherwise we're not doing it. It's like, actually, it's just easier to sit down and have the meeting with them. And then if they say, well, it's just unfair, which I have had, well, it's just unfair. Well, have you got any more evidence to justify why we shouldn't do this? No. Okay, thank you for coming. That's 5-minute conversation done. So they've appealed in writing. You need to arrange the meeting. You have to give them 3 working days notice of the meeting, even though it's their meeting that they've requested. You still have to give them 3 working days notice, and this should be within, ideally, the week after the appeal. They've appealed it, or at the most within 10 working days of it. It should not be, again, oh, we'll wait for Bob to get back from his holiday. No. This needs to go ahead. Okay, that's just committees going, oh, that sounds quite difficult, I don't want to do it. Okay, They do have the right to a companion, again, a work colleague or a trade union rep, because this is still part of the formal process. They do have the right to the notes, which is again why we say to record it, so we can do a transcription. We do record it in case something new comes up. In the meeting, again, somebody for the club, an HR person and the audio, or at the most 2 people for the club. Okay. The outcome of this, which always bugs me, but we haven't had actually anybody using it to their advantage, is that you can improve the outcome, i.e. if they had a final written warning, you can downgrade it to a first written, or if they have first written, you can give it to an advisory note, but you can't then say, actually, we're going to dismiss you. Okay. Even if they would say, yeah, I did it, and what are you going to do about it? They don't usually do that because they do know it's being recorded. Okay, it usually is that they either want to have it downgraded, and if they've got a reason, we can do that if we agree with them. But usually we do confirm that they are on the final written warning. Okay, the appeal outcome needs to be within 5 working days of that meeting. Again, like I said, it depends what's in your policy. The maximum should be 10 working days. It needs to be in writing. It does stay on record what was decided, whether you upheld the initial warning or whether you've rejected it. And there is no further appeal possible. That is it. If they were then still unhappy and they kept coming back to us, we would advise them to go and talk to ACAS Early Conciliation, because there isn't anything internally that we need to be doing. They can raise a grievance. That would then be dealt with in a similar process, and we'll go through that at a different time. But there is no more appeal to the appeal. They can't keep going on that. Okay. And then there's us. Please have to help. So, has anybody got any questions about that? If you're not in it, it's an overview, and it's good if you do have any issues, you go and refer to that and refer to this audio, and obviously pass it on to any committee members who do get involved. Because it gives them a better understanding of what the process is, and that, like Nadia said earlier, it's not just a chat. So how are you doing? Do you think you did something wrong? Well, yeah, no, it needs to be a little bit more interrogative than that.
Caroline, sorry to interrupt you. Just to, I'm currently dealing with, very quickly, I know that I'm currently dealing with an investigation, and it's not unusual for us to say, you need to reconvene the investigation meeting, go back and check these points. Based on the current evidence we have, I don't feel it reflects the actual issue. So what the disciplinary hearing manager can only look at the evidence that's presented in front of them. So I've asked them to go back, check some points, because I don't think the evidence currently reflects what the potential seriousness of the issue. So it wouldn't be unusual for us to go back and ask you to do some further investigation. So I find that's quite a common need to be able to have to do that.
Nadia, do you want to talk about that, because you've just had to do that?
Yes, I've also just had a case where I've had to do that. And in both cases, actually, the people were very upset to be invited back for a second investigation. So it is important that you know that part of the investigation means that we might have further questions. And it's always good to end your investigation meeting with saying, if we have further questions, we will contact you again. Because like Hayley says, it's really not uncommon to have to go back and ask further questions.
Okay, so everybody knows how to do disciplinaries. That's great, excellent. Have you got any other questions at the moment? Is everybody behaving themselves at your clubs?
I've got one. What is the role of a standard operational procedure in a disciplinary? And I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but so we've got somebody who they're not going down the disciplinary route, but I just wanted to get prepared for it. And what would be the role if we did go down that role of a standard operational procedure? Because we're a mini golf, so we don't have committees or anything like that. It's a slightly different track for us. And because we've just got a new online booking system, our standard operational procedures are lacking at the moment, and I'm desperately trying to get them in place. But what would be the role of those procedures?
Well, you don't have to have it written down. I mean, obviously it's better if it is written down, but the thing is that you will have trained the staff on using the booking system, otherwise they can't use it, you see.
Yes.
So it's that training that you'd be relying on. If somebody's not doing what you've trained them to do, and you've shown them and they've kind of gone through it and shown you that they can do it, and then 2 days later they're doing it all wrong, part of that is possibly retraining. But yeah, it's to say, look, we went through the training, you said you understood it, you showed me you understood it, now you're doing it wrong, can you explain that to me, and see what they would say. So you would, even if it's not documented, you would still have some basis for saying, look, you should know how to do this, why are you not doing it? Yeah.
Right.
However, if you do have them written down, you need to follow them. So so you can't discipline someone if you have it written down and then someone has done it like that, but you wanted them to do it differently. You wouldn't be able to discipline them. You would need to update your SOPs before you do you know what I mean? They need to reflect what you're disciplining if you've written it down.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and not having a committee, so it is being flexible, because some of the committees are very unwilling to get involved. I'm just saying as well. It's just talking through with us who's the best person to do it. So it could be that one person, there might be 1 or 2 people involved in the club, in the organisation anyway. So to have them involved, and then senior manager, it's supposed to go up in seniority. So it would be sort of a line manager, and then maybe a finance person if you've got a finance person. But we can talk it through, because I appreciate that some places don't have 15 committee members sitting around waiting to be asked to do stuff. But we would still make it as fair as we can do. And ACAS does understand that some small businesses don't have hundreds of people who can do it, and do have some flexibility.
Could I just add that if you've got standard operating procedures and more than one person isn't doing it, it needs to be consistent across everybody in that department. So if you've got 4 people at your adventure golf and one person's not doing it, but also somebody else isn't doing it, then my understanding is they all need to be treated the same. So
chocolate.
The procedures are
yes.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you.
Otherwise, you just get yourself into more trouble, because you start the disciplinary with one person and another person hasn't been doing it either, but we haven't taken them down a disciplinary route. So if you have standard operating procedures, then it needs to be applicable to everybody.
Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point being that usually the ones that get picked on for disciplinaries are the ones who are a bit obnoxious about it. The ones who are not doing it but are like, oh, I'm really sorry, oh yes, I'll try and do it again, but still keep doing it wrong, they tend to get just ignored because they're not being a pain in the neck, you see. But it's absolutely right what Melanie said, that you've got to treat all of them. And to be honest, at the very latest in the investigation meeting, they're going to say, well, Shelley doesn't do it either. I don't see, but you're not talking to her, and that's at the very latest. Then that's when you're going to need to pull Shelley in and do the whole process with her as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, so I'm just thinking what else we've got. We've got a settlement agreement probably tomorrow. Actually, 2 settlement agreements. Apprentices. You just need to be careful if you've got apprentices that you have them on the correct contract, because if you don't have them on the correct contract, then it defaults to the old style apprentice agreement, which means that if you terminate them before the end of their course, you have to pay them for the full length of their course. So we had a new client come on board. They already had an issue with the apprentice, which is why they came on. And they had not given him an apprentice contract at all. They'd given him, I think, £0 or something. It was something so not relevant, which meant that the default contract, employment law contract for apprentices applied, which meant because they terminated him early on, actually because he'd said, can I have time off for training? And they terminated him. Their greenkeeper there deserves to be dismissed, to be honest. We're now going through a process to obviously deal with the grievance and everything, it's quite possible to go to early conciliation. But the liability at this point is for about £14,000 of unpaid wages, because that's what they would have to pay legally to the end of his apprenticeship. And because they didn't get round to doing the right contract, and two, they fired him for asserting what's called a statutory right, which is the right for time off for training. So it's unfair dismissal, and you've got to pay that money. So what we're trying to do is obviously limit the amount we're doing. He has got a new job, a new apprenticeship, so there is a chance we can get away with a lot less than that. If they'd done it right to start off with, they wouldn't have to be having these conversations at all. That's the thing. So just be careful with any apprentices that you're taking on. And again, with a Kickstart scheme, if you have got Kickstart people coming, make sure that you've spoken to us about getting your Kickstart template, and we'll send that through so that that has the right wording as well. So that there's nothing going to come back and bite you on that one. Okay. Good. Sorry, I didn't mean to use your name, Shelley. I'm sorry. I usually use me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've just used Shelley as a bad. Bob is usually a good one, because Bob is at that. We don't often have many Bobs, but then you've got Bob Towell, who's now gone because I insulted him, and then I've got Shelley, who's still here, having insulted. I'm like, okay, it's one of those days. Apologies, everybody. Insulted. Okay, if there's no other questions.
Caroline, quick question.
Sorry, Steve. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Before you insult me, quick question. You talk about settlement agreements.
Yes.
We're having a discussion here about one of the staff, and we probably will be in contact with you further. But
yeah.
Can you offer it to just one staff, or will
Yes.
that be discrimination? You can do that, can you?
No, you can only offer it to one staff. Really,
As I'm saying, yeah.
It's a very specific. It's like a surgical instrument. Redundancy is a blunt instrument. It has to apply to everybody. A settlement agreement usually only applies to one person.
Lovely. Okay. I'm just with that sort of thought that we got one other person who's maybe looking at leaving at the same, or trying to get something out of us, and we got one who wants to go. So it's a matter of making sure that
maybe I'll give you a call after my Zoom calls today, and we'll have a quick chat. Does that work, or tomorrow?
I'll try and give me a shout tomorrow if you've got it on only a brief 5 minutes. But it's worth it, because I think we're getting to that stage now where we do need some professional input. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Caroline.
Lovely. Right. Okay. Well, otherwise we'll leave you all to the wonderful gales that are going to sweep across the country. And then hopefully see you next week, where we might get some of that wonderful sunshine that we keep being promised that is definitely coming at some point. Okay, take care, everybody. Have a good weekend. Bye.